Hey, welcome to Parent Conversations. It is April 11th. Oh my goodness, where is April going? And we are on week 5 of our parenting series, and Tim Keady is with us again. Thank you, Tim, for coming and sharing your insight with us. And I'm looking for the topic, and I'll let Tim introduce the topic himself. What?
Risk and protective factors.
Thank you. Risk and protective factors. I remember looking at it now last week when I created everything and got it all scheduled out in Facebook. Hey, giving a shout out to our health departments, Bear River Health Department, Davis County Health Department, and Central Utah Public Health Department. They are what makes Parent Conversations possible. So with very little further ado here, I'm going to turn the time over to Tim and remind participants, if you need to make a comment, you can raise your hand, you can unmute yourself, or you can type something in the chat, and I'll be happy to share. Take it away, Tim.
Okay, Megan, thanks very much. So I'm glad to be here with you guys today. We're talking about something that's going to be a little different. I'm talking about risk and protective factors for families, children, and parents even. As you can see, we've shown these slides before for people who've been with us for the last few weeks. Much of what I do is based on preventative actions for things that people have basically gotten some kind of trouble for at some point. So we do a lot of stuff with drugs and alcohol, substance misuse, suicide, education, different areas, all different areas of education for the general health and wellness of populations, working with veterans, homeless, all these different groups that I work with. And the thing that's always fascinating to me is that it gets to the point where how did we have a society that has having significant issues as they've gotten older? Well, how can we kind of reduce that incidence of disease, illness, accident, suicide, whatever you want to call it? How can we be better at what we do as a society? So a lot of what my focus is as an assistant professor at Utah State University Extension is to try and figure out means to provide skills and access for good behaviors that are going to help others. When I talk about be more successful in general, that means basically live longer, healthier lives. So we're talking about some of that today. We do have introductions. We've done this before in the past with people. I think we've got most of the people who've been here before, but we have people just talk about who they are really quick. Say, what do we call you, your type of family structure, if you want to provide that, where are you from, and what do you hope to gain from attending. So again, I'm Tim Keady, kind of a nuclear blended family, grandparent, from New York, where I'm actually from, actually living here now in Hyde Park. And what I hope to gain from attending is getting information from you, because that helps me to be a better, I think, person in general, but also a better educator, and a better assistant professor for Utah State Extension. I need your input to make my data mean something. And that's just very important to me. I can do lots of things on my own, but without families and people to talk to, I'm not going to be very successful. So does anybody else want to introduce themselves?
I will. So I'm Shirley Griffiths, and I am let's see, my type of family structure. My husband and I are empty nesters. We are in a blended family. I have 4 children. He has 4 children. We have 25 grandchildren. I am from here in the Cache Valley area, actually born and raised on the Idaho side. I'm just barely over the border. And then now living here, kind of moved all over and ended up back here. And what do I hope to gain from attending? Well, I'm super excited with this particular topic, the risk and protective factors. This is what we are all about. So I love having discussions on this and getting the information out there and helping families understand the importance of the risk and protective factors and how they can implement them with their families, and particularly with the Discovery Family Adventures, how we try to make that really easy for families. So that's me.
Thank you, Shirley.
I think I've introduced myself a number of times. Really quick, Megan Waite. I grew up in California, currently single empty nester. 4 adult daughters, 5 grandkids. Let's see. And yeah, I've been in Cache Valley about half my life. So there I am. Laurie, oh, you got your microphone on. I'm off now. Go.
I hope that this will happen and I won't have screaming in the background, but I'm Laurie. I'm the mother of 8. I grew up in Brigham, live in Brigham. We lived in Vernal for a couple years. I hope to learn a little bit better of how to teach age appropriate stuff for each of my kids, because I have the range from 2 to 22.
Well, thank you. Amanda or Melissa, sometimes we do it online, but whatever. Or we can go to the next two. We appreciate you guys being here. And for those who shared. Okay, remember last time we asked about doing some of the family meeting stuff. This is kind of following up on that for people who are even watching online. We talked about, have you tried bringing people together, having conversations on a weekly basis with your children, your family, with the children taking a lead, everybody sharing some of that information, and doing it kind of on a regular basis so that children and family members know what to expect kind of throughout their week. So we kind of ask people if they've tried this, and if anybody's had an opportunity to try it yet, but that's something that we just are asking at this point. So if you've tried it, that's great. If you haven't, I encourage you to try and do kind of the family meetings that we've talked about in the previous meetings for communication. We find that that works really well. Also providing an opportunity for your children to schedule some things, to think about what they're doing, be able to speak about what they're experiencing becomes very important. So giving that opportunity for people to be interactive kind of throughout their lifetime becomes very important as they get a little bit older and as they go out into the world themselves. So it's something to think about as you do that. Okay, this presentation is going to be a little different. We're talking about risk protective factors. We want to talk about some of the basic information. We're talking about creating a family plan, but improving and understanding risk and protective factors for your specific families. Ground rules again, we talked about these in the past. Respect each other's time, person, ideas, be kind, show compassion, share success. If you want to share some of those, that would be great. Limit disclosure of sensitive topics, participate if you feel comfortable. Then confidentiality of groups important. So not spreading a lot of things out, letting people have an opportunity to talk. Not that we're trying to be secretive about things, but we just want to protect people's interests and ideas. We can see people's names when they put them up on the screen and stuff. So I just want people to be aware of that. Okay, so this is actually the 5th in our 6th series, or I should say 6th session series. We talked about mental and physical health, introduced the series. We had importance of communication. We talked about kind of human development, how things change throughout a lifetime for a child. We're going to talk about risk protective factors today. Then we'll talk about next week, the final week, we'll be talking about the resources to improve quality of life. That's QOL. So that's kind of what we're doing so far. The homework was to create super smart goal. Did anybody create super smart goals? That's what we have asked in the past a little bit, but I don't know if you guys had a chance to do some of those. Or maybe even after you finish the series, it might be time to go back and look at super smart goals that you guys can come up with. And again, being able to be public becomes what I find very important for others to do when they talk about super smart goals. A little more interactive, a little better way to do it for people. That's something we've worked on. So has anybody done any super smart goals for your families? Like I said, oh, Shirley, go ahead.
I was just going to say, so I haven't necessarily with my family, but I know Megan and I had a long trip to Denver last weekend, a couple of weekends ago. And we did a lot of super smart goal setting while we were on the way for the program and, and the different things that we're doing. So yeah.
Very good. Well, thanks. That's something that, again, sometimes it's hard to sit down and make goals when you're so busy in life, but just when you get an opportunity, think about trying those if you can. I think that goal setting becomes important for some of us. And then it becomes more important as I think as we go through our lifetimes and want to try things that are different. Like I said, I've mentioned before in the past, my wife and I have done these for a number of years. We did 6 month, 1 year, 5 year, 10-year plans. And part of that was even for me, was even going back to graduate school. So many years ago. So one of those things that we didn't expect to do that, but we were presented with an opportunity to do it and did it, was able to actually make a big difference in our lives, something we not expected. So again, you never know where, as you look beyond your kind of struggles now, which a lot of families, a lot of people are struggling now because of what's going on. And now we increase even some of the financial burdens on people as we've gone through some of these things recently. It makes it even more difficult and more stressful for many families. Is trying to figure out what we're going to do in the next year. Some of us trying to figure out what we're going to do the next week. So it's difficult, but I encourage you as you get an opportunity to try and do some of these. It does help. It does allow you to think a little bit more clearly about what you're even doing today. Just kind of my spiel for super smart goals when you get a chance. Okay, risk and protective factors. Some of the definitions. Talk research-based prevention programs focused on intervening early in a child's development to strengthen protective factors before problem behaviors develop. Now that's from National Drug Institute and the NIH. They do a lot of work, obviously, on factors that affect lives. And so we're talking about, for me, risk and protective factors have many different formats, definitions, can be used for many different areas of life and child and human development. But I'm looking at this really, in the end, in general, we'll talk about some of the basically drug and alcohol related things that are related to risk and protective factors, but the factors are pretty consistent across the board for success as students, families, individuals. These risk and protective factors fall into really good sets of domains that we call that will be allowing us to hopefully think a little bit more clearly about what we're doing here with the risk and protective factors with our families. Here's a table that I had here, just an idea of things to start. Describes how risk and protective factors affect people in 5 domains or settings where interventions can take place. So on the left side, you see risk factors, center is domain, right side of that has protective factors. So when we start talking about what goes on with children at different ages, these are just some examples of things that fall into these different domains. So in an individual, we talk about early aggressive behavior being a risk factor for that individual. And a protective factor is self-control. So if a child's aggressive early, how can we teach them self-control? That's one of the things that as skill building goes, we want to try and change what our behaviors are towards that child, maybe get some professional help if necessary for all these different areas. So early aggressive behavior may simply mean telling a child, no, that's not what we do. Consistently and discipline in a manner that's going to be appropriate for that child's age. Talk about the family domain, lack of parental supervision is a risk factor. So if the child's left alone a lot and doesn't have to answer for what they do, that can be a problem and a risk factor. And the way that we stop that, obviously, is through parental monitoring. So how do we have a parent monitor that child consistently, and again, in a way that's going to make that child developmentally appropriately feel safe and well at their home or where they might be living. Peer domain, we talk about substance abuse and misuse. So somebody who's misusing substances, we talk about one of the protective factors is academic competence. So that's when we actually talk about children and young adults staying in school, being consistent, trying to work with them to have opportunities for education that are going to be helpful for them, things they want to do, maybe finding something that they like to do. So that domain of peer with substance use and misuse really is a big problem that I see consistently throughout what I do, especially working in some of the treatment facilities that I work with, trying to make what we call great changes in their lives for success. Drug availability is a risk factor domain that's school. We talk about anti-drug use policies being a protective factor. So drug availability in school obviously is a big issue. So some child can walk in and get, for example, pot even in their high school. That's a problem. How do we stop that in a school? And that's through some anti-drug use policies through the school and through the people that are there. And then last domain is community. And we talk about poverty being a big issue as a risk factor. Then we talk about protective factor being strong neighborhood attachment. So even in those challenged socioeconomic, lower socioeconomic status communities, you can have actually great neighborhood attachment and have children, families, loved ones be successful, even if they are in poverty, because of that support of that whole community. So again, just ideas of some of the things we talk about, strengthening factors for our families and for our children. Okay, so we talked about some of the definitions. I've got a number of definitions here. For this one, we talk about developmental competencies, which is adhering to cultural and social norms, developing a positive sense of identity, efficacy, and well-being. There are variables that promote or hinder the process. These are frequently referred to as protective and risk factors. So kind of a lot of words there, but the presence or absence of combinations of risk factors, protective and risk factors contribute to mental health of youth. Identifying protective and risk factors in youth may guide the prevention and intervention strategies pursued with them. Protective and risk factors may also influence the course mental health disorders might take at present. That's something we don't talk a lot about either, is mental health disorders often present in early teen. So somewhere between 14 to 22 years old is when some mental health disorders present themselves. So until that point, a child or young adult may not have even had any issues with their mental health, but as the stress of life increases, as the hormone levels change, all those things occur and hit them at one time, we actually can find some issues with students developing some significant mental health concerns and need some help. That's something I think that many families don't expect, because a child will go for many years and 12, 13, 14 years old, their developmental stages are very predictable, doing really well, successful in school, successful in the families and friends, all of that. And then all of a sudden something clicks and something changes, and they can become defiant, they can become angry, they can become all these different areas, and people wonder what happened. And it's actually not that unusual. And for myself, having worked with adolescents in a college level, we had many students that would have presentations of mental illness, significant mental illness, without any history of problems before that. And that became difficult for families to kind of comprehend, and also become difficult to treat. For many of them, it just, the idea of changing what they've done throughout their lifetime was difficult, but with some mental health counseling and also at times some medication, they were actually able to be very successful. Just kind of my long spiel about what goes on with mental health issues in youth a little bit. So talking about protective factors, to be defined as a characteristic at the biological, psychological, family, or community, including peers and cultural levels associated with lower likelihood of problem outcomes, that reduces the negative impact or risk factor on problem outcomes. So protective factors can be many different things. We talk about it being something that prevents problem outcomes. So that's something we look at as protective factor. The risk factor, the characteristic of the biological same areas, psychological, family, community, or cultural level, that precedes and is associated with a higher likelihood of problem outcomes. We've got a table we're going to show you in a moment. Examples for the 5 domains. Again, we talked about some of those before: youth, family, community, and society. I think that was one we showed you before, so I apologize. Okay. When we go to SAMHSA, SAMHSA has Substance, Alcohol, Mental Health Services Administration definitions. They have risk factors associated with a higher likelihood of developing a problem. For example, low impulse control, pure substance misuse. Protective factors are associated with lower likelihood of developing a problem. So if you have protective factors, academic achievement, parental bonding, family cohesion, all of those things are protective factors for youth and families. So understanding risk and protective factors is essential to prevention. So as we're talking about preventing things, preventing is really about education. It's about understanding what goes on developmentally with someone, but also what goes on in a community. Our communities are based on risk and protective factors that may or may not be culturally influenced. Some may be good, some may be not as good. And so it's something else to take into account depending on where you move into and what your family situations might be. Here's some key features of the risk protective factors. They exist in multiple contexts: individual, family, parent, community. They're correlated and cumulative. So we talk about that being interrelated, and also as one thing occurs, other things occur. So for example, we talk about attendance to school, lower grades, being exposed to substances, substance misuse, dropping out of school. So all those things can happen and roll upon each other, make it a cumulative event for that individual. So again, individual factors can be associated with multiple problems. Risk and protective factors are influential over time. So those risk and protective factors can be a big issue for many people if we're not careful. And I think looking at this is in the context of what we're doing today and what Cheryl Lee and Megan do on a regular basis in My Discovery Destination, brings us back to the fact that we've got people really working hard to help our youth and families find skills that they can use to reduce the problems that our children may face from those risk factors. And that's something I think that I really appreciate with what they're doing and what they're working on now and continuing to work on. And that can be many different areas which we know are available. They're positively correlated. Protective factors, talk about this again, just kind of correlate the protective factors. One of the things I wanted to get to, talk about reduced risk, but cumulative effect again, developing condition impacts your physical and mental health. Youth with multiple protective factors are at reduced risk. We know that, so we talked about a moment ago. But these correlations underscore the importance of early intervention and intervention to target multiple, not single factors. So that's something to look at. And what can we do to help our children with some of these risk factors? So if you have more risk factors and you don't have any protective factors, it increases the possibility of issues with that child. Okay, here are some things that we know happens on a regular basis with families that may be having a problem. We can look back and see what happened in that family as that child was growing up. And again, we're talking in general terms here. It's not, every individual is different. We talk about unique individuals, unique families, unique situations. So there may or may not be consistency with some of the things we say, but we're trying to give kind of a good picture of what's going on. So child's earliest interactions, obviously, with the family. Family situations can heighten risk for child's later drug use and abuse, for example, when there is a lack of attachment and nurturing by parents or caregivers. Ineffective parenting, caregiver or parent who abuses drugs. Obviously, we know that can cause problems. We might even talk about that in different contexts. There's different terms that people use for some of these things. Some of the terms are ones we like to use, some are things we not like to use. Good parents, bad parents. To me, there's no such thing as a good or bad parent. There's good or bad parenting possibly, but I think in most cases, most parents, except for very few, want the best for their children. We talk about families providing protection for their drug use when there is a strong bond between the children and parents, parental involvement in the child's life, and clear limits and consistent enforcement of discipline. So families do have some things they know can work. That bond from childhood and from very young is very important. Having the parents involved consistently, and clear limits and consistent enforcement of discipline. some people think that we should not discipline children. But I think that some of the studies have shown that that's not actually correct. Discipline becomes important. We talk about discipline being consistent, but we're not talking about spanking or hitting someone. We're talking about what happens if a child does something that's not correct. We might correct them. They do something that's a problem, you may send them to the room, have reflection time, whatever you want to call it. So there's things that we can do that are clearly going to limit and have to be more consistent for discipline. Okay, interactions outside the family can be difficult because we talk about poor classroom behavior, social skills, academic failure, association with drug abusing peers. In most cases, families don't often know who their children are with during their day. And that becomes more apparent as you look at what's happening with families. When they come in, they say, well, I used to be their friend, 10 years ago. Who is that friend now? And they find out that person's been misusing drugs for many years, maybe in and out of a jail system. And they go, boy, I never knew that. I never knew that about that child growing up, or I would not have had my child with that person. And again, we can't always control who our child is with, but we can ask them or find out what's going on with that family, or maybe bringing that child to our family and talking to them differently and showing them something different that may have changed their life. So our association with drug abusing peers can have many different forms. Okay, other factors: drug availability, trafficking patterns, belief that drug abuse is generally tolerated, or risks that can influence young people to start abusing drugs. So we've been through a bunch of things so far with risk and protective factors, but I just want to talk with you guys. Talk about risk and protective factors. Do you feel that that's an important part of a successful family? What do you think? Knowing what they are and how we can prevent them? What do you guys think?
Well, I think that they're super, super important. That's why I spend my life on them. But going back to what you were saying, as far as with the discipline and whatnot, the thought that I was having when you were talking about that, I mean, whatever we call it, discipline, whatever, I think to me what it is setting those consequences so that our children learn that there are consequences to their behavior. Because when they grow up and they go out into the world, and even quite honestly, even as children, there will be consequences to the choices that they make. And better that we help them understand that while they are young and those consequences are little and maybe don't have as big of an impact, so that they're better prepared when they, as adults. So, for me, I was very much, my discipline style was consequences. And, whatever the children, when they made choices, there was a consequence that went with that. If they made choices that if they followed the family rules, there were really positive consequences. And if they didn't follow the family rules, those consequences weren't so pleasant. And there were privileges that went away and things like that. So anyway, I like to think about it in terms of helping set up consequences so that our children can learn while they're kind of inconsequential.
That's right. It's small. It's starting small, right? As they do things. My wife always talks about natural and logical consequences. And as a family therapist, that's what she espouses to her clients and the patients she works with, is don't do something that has no relation to what just occurred. Try and do something that's going to be appropriate for what happened in that time, and do it quickly and do it effectively. Don't wait to do it till another day or whatever. Say, hey, you did this back, yesterday. We're going to be grounded now for a week or whatever. Make something that's going to be appropriate for that time, for that issue. So thanks, that's good input. And Megan, did you have something too?
Oh, Shirley pretty much said it all. Just, yeah, especially if, I think the biggest thing is parents knowing that there's the connection between all these risk factors and the potential risky behaviors down the road. And if we can get them to understand that there are some things that they can be proactive at doing, then you can kind of break that. We'll call it, it's not really a cycle, but the chain. We can break the chain. We'll say it that way.
Yeah, No, very good. Yeah, thanks. I appreciate that. Anybody else have anything they'd like to add? Okay, I'm going to go to kind of one of it's kind of a nice way to look at this, I think. Risk and protective factors here. Risk factors on the left, protective factors on the right, child, family, service, life event, societal. So there's many, if you look at risk and protective factors, especially online or in books, you'll find many different opportunities to look at things that are a little different. But this risk factor for a child, for example, difficult temperament, low self-esteem, impaired cognitive development, poor physical health, poor language skills. Those are kind of the risk factors. Protective factors would be early temperament or easy temperament, good social and emotional skills, well-developed cognitive skills, good physical health, good language skills. Those are things that we know can occur. They're going to help our children. How do we get to them becomes something we work at. For the family, disharmony, any form of child abuse or neglect, harsh or inconsistent parenting, career, or basically some mental illness or substance misuse and use. Those are things we know are risk factors. Protective factors, stable home environment, warm and supportive parenting, secure attachments with significant carers, so people that care for that child. Service, we talk about poor relationships at the service, limited experiences of societal interaction with peers. So how do we do things? High quality education, care services. So where do they get their help from? Service climate enhances belonging and connectedness. Warm and supportive relationships with carers, so people who are there. Life events, stressful life events, that's a family member experience of trauma. Warm and supportive relationships, secure attachments with your significant person, family members, and societal discrimination, isolation, socioeconomic isolation, lack of access to support services, and protective factors, inclusion, access to support services, economic security. So these groups here with child, family, service, life events, and societal, a little different from risk and protective factors we talk about with drugs and alcohol and those types of things, but I think it's still very important to look at some of these areas that we can work on as families. How do we make sure that our children are well educated? How do we make sure that some of these things are done with good language skills, good physical health? What are some things we can do? What I'm beginning to wonder also is there's so many things going on with families having to work and people having to work 1 or 2 jobs, or both parents having to work. We're finding that a lot of our families are really having difficulty with making that choice of either, well, if a parent stays home, they may not be able to make their rent that month, may not be able to make the food purchases they want. That's becoming a real issue, especially talking about gas increasing in price also, and how much it costs to fill up a tank of gas now versus even 2 or 3 months ago. So all these things have changed over the last, few months. The rate of inflation, huge, significant impact going on there. We're saying 7.9% or something, last numbers I saw. And some people actually numbers saying are closer to 17%, depending what the commodity is. So huge issues with purchasing and value for your money. And that's been a problem for us kind of across the board here. So risk and protective factors, there's so many things that go into it. And again, it's not just one area, it's many areas. We're gonna look at some of the areas specifically right now. We talk about youth violence. This is one of the things we come up with the CDC. Talks about individual risk factors. Were they victimized violently? Attention deficit, hyperactivity, learning disorders. These are all risk factors. History of early aggressive behavior, involvement with drugs, alcohol, tobacco, low IQ, poor behavioral control, deficits in cognitive information processing abilities, high emotional distress, history of treatment for emotional problems, anti-societal beliefs and attitudes, exposure to violence and conflict in the family. Again, these are some individual risk factors. Again, we talk about for increased youth violence throughout their lifetime. Family risk factors, authoritarian child rearing attitudes. So basically, it's my way or the highway, harsh, lax, inconsistent disciplinary practices, low parental involvement, low emotional attachment to parents or caregivers, low parental education and income, parental substance abuse or criminality, poor family functioning, poor monitoring and supervision of children. Family risk factors to me become very important. It's what I see on a regular basis from many people. And oftentimes it's a lack of hope. We don't talk about that very much either, but Some of the risk factors we're seeing in these areas are due to lack of hope for those families. People misuse drugs generally to escape. They may like the feeling, may like whatever, but in most cases, it's because their living environment is not something that they're happy with, or themselves are not happy with, or they may have mental illnesses. But there's lots of reasons for misuse. But we know that there's some issues that occur on a regular basis with people who have a lack of hope and don't think they can go anywhere. So it needs to change in our society in some way. Peer and social risk factors, association with delinquent peers, involvement in gangs, rejection by peers, lack of involvement, conventional activities, poor academic performance, low commitment to school and school failure. The last one here, commitment to school and school failure, that seems to be a really big issue in Utah. We see it quite a bit. Some of the students we work with, they don't think school is important. That's something that we're surprised at. But we're hoping we can increase that in some way by showing that importance to the families. And again, it's a lack of hope for people not knowing what to do as parents or caregivers that's causing some of that issue with what we see for the people that I work with specifically. For academic performance, again, it's part of what we do. It's part of that kind of cycle that occurs, as Megan was talking about. Community risk factors, diminished economic opportunities, high concentration of poor residents, high level of transiency, high level of family disruption, low levels of community participation, disorganized neighborhoods. We know that communities become very important. There's actually whole studies set up to help communities now because of what we're seeing on a regular basis. So some of the communities that care, CTC, is a big one now that we work with and Shirley works with, trying to change what happens in our community. So we have a better level of understanding and helping those people that may need it. Individual protective factors, intolerant attitude towards deviance, so deviant behavior, high IQ. So the protective factors, sorry, I started that better, I apologize. Individual protective factors include these. We talked about some of those risk factors. Now we're talking about people who don't want to see things that are going wrong. So intolerant attitude towards deviance, high IQ, high grade point average, high educational aspirations, positive social orientation, popularity acknowledged by peers, high developed social skills and competencies, high developed skills for realistic planning, and having a religious belief. Those are protective factors for our youth. The other protective factors are connectedness to family or adults outside the family, ability to discuss problems with parents, perceive parental expectations about school performance are high, frequent shared activities with parents, consistent presence of parents, at least one of the following: when awakening, when arriving home, mealtime, going to bed, involvement in social activities, parental family use of constructive strategies for coping with problems, vision of models of constructive behaviors. So probably going back to the consistent presence of parents, that becomes important. That's a great family protective factor. So having a parent there at some point with that child, they know that they're being cared for, that somebody's there consistently is very important, is a great protective factor. Peer and societal protective factors, possession of effective relationships at school, commitment to school, investment in school and doing well at school, close relationship with non-deviant peers. I don't really like the non-deviant kind of thing, but it's okay. Membership in peer groups that not condone antisocial behavior, involvement in pro-social activities, doing things that are beneficial to our society, exposure to school climates with the following characteristics: intensive supervision, clear behavior rules, firm disciplinary methods, engagement with parents and teachers. So school climates become very important as a protective factor in our society. It's something else we don't talk very often about, but it's very important. So risk protective factor begins with parents understanding what to expect as children move through life stages, active listening, appropriate response, what's going on, communication. So your role as parents, there's lots of things that we'd like you to do, and creating some plans, doing some different things. But I was going to ask, what do you think your role as a parent is these days? We have some parents that believe it's a societal role of parenting, where a society works with our children so our whole community helps. Some parents don't want the community to help, they want to do it themselves. Some parents believe that the community is not doing a good job. schools aren't doing well, so we take them out of school. I know some people here do some homeschooling, which I really admire, because that is difficult to do, I think. And that's something that, when done well, can actually provide great opportunities for our children in many different areas. So I appreciate that. But what do you believe your roles are? I mean, this is just an example. I talk about children who plan their own goals, set weekly schedules, evaluate their own work, build up their frontal cortex and take more control over their lives. They're actually more successful by being able to do that from a very young age. So is there anything you guys have done that you think has helped your child do better and be more successful in society?
At what age did you start having your children set their own goals and follow through with them?
Probably 5 or 6. But again, it was really developmentally appropriate, so very young. But so, for example, a child might have a goal. Well, the goal for the child might be, I want to be able to make my bed, for example. And how can we help that child make their bed? So every morning, making their bed, brushing their teeth. Those are some goals that we'd set aside for the children. At one point, everybody does different things. We used to give them little stickers and do different things so they could see how they're progressing throughout their week. But it was actually done just to kind of encourage them, just for a short period of time. Then we actually got rid of those stickers and the children would just begin doing it on their own. So setting that up, 5 or 6, obviously developmentally appropriate. There's very simple things, was kind of the way we started. And as they got a little bit older, we started adding more things and different things that they could do. But that's great. That's a good question. And again, we have to be, I think, realistic about what we do in some cases. And I think that, well, you guys know some of you are doing things with your children at home, but some things that are being asked in some schools, I think, is some of them are not developmentally appropriate. I've got one of my grandchildren is actually going to a school where she's in 1st grade and they have her doing math problems that are not really something that a 5-year-old should be doing it. But it's a private school and they are trying to get those children really going very quickly. And it's surprising to me what they're doing. And again, not that it's wrong, it's just very surprising to me that we're talking about algebra for a 5-year-old. Yes, it's good, but it's causing one of my daughters to actually, who's a chemical engineer, her husband's a graduate chemical engineer also, to go back and think about how they do education because of what they're seeing with her. Some things they try and keep up with, and you've got a 5-year-old having an hour worth of homework. It's kind of unusual to do, but that's what they do. So everybody has different ideas. Anybody else have anything else they want to add to that? All right, so risk and protective factors. We talk about creating some plans for our children. Give us some quick ideas that I came up with. Kind of evidence-based information that we've looked at, ideas that I've gotten from a number of different SAMHSA sites, NIH sites, educational sites. How do we create a plan for our children? Each child's unique, but some of these things I put down, you guys can add your own to this. Listen to your child and communicate with them. Read to them, teach, and educate. Some studies show that just reading to a child actually reduces poverty in that family significantly as that child just reaches the age of 30. So just reading to your children on a regular basis, that's a huge deal. And having them read back to you becomes important, showing that importance of obviously expanding their mind, expanding their ability to speak, all of that becomes important. So be a positive role model, get to know our children's friends and families, working with people that I work with substance use. Many of them talk about how their families had no idea who they were with during the day. No idea from a very young age. Smoking pot, 12, 13 years old, 11 years old on a regular basis, and nobody knew. They knew something was up and the children came home like, oh, something's going on. They said, oh, I just had a bad day or whatever. But that's something that I find is very important with our families and children and people I work with, try to make sure that people know who they are. And again, it's not a good or a bad thing. It's making a judgment on that family. It's just that, how do we know what's going on in that home? And growing up, when I grew up many years ago, a little different than now possibly, but doing play dates and all that is very important, and thinks it's a great way to do it. But finding out who their friends and families are, that becomes a good thing. Be active and participants in their lives, discipline with kindness and consistency. Shirley has some good comments on that. It is important to be consistent, and also do it in a way that's, we talk about not penalizing them for things, but doing it with love and kindness, and making sure that it's proportional to what the problem might be, what they had done that you did not like, and you want discipline for it. Show love in actions, words, self-care. So you show self-care. Kind of strange to think that way, but how do you make sure that what you're doing is appropriate? How are you going to feel after you've disciplined that child, or after you've helped that child with something? What do you do afterwards? Is there a feeling of guilt, whatever it might be? Reflect on some of that. Make sure you're not causing problems for yourself and your families. Support setting goals, schedules, allow mistakes, all that kind of thing with the child. Support positive experiences and service. Something else has been in there, something else, but service, education, whatever it might be, positive experiences are important. Provide positive moral instruction experiences. So whether it's church going, whatever you want to do, or just morally you want to help your child be successful. Your opportunities for hard work. Hard work becomes very important. Knowing how to work hard is something that I'm grateful that I was able to do that growing up. I spent a lot of time doing landscaping for other people. And we had a family landscaping business that I grew up doing. So I used a wheelbarrow from the time I was very young. Like I said, just to tell people, when I was 10 years old, I found out a wheelbarrow wasn't a toy. I was really disappointed. So I'd used it for so long. Used it for other stuff, but we had an uncle who did landscaping, and we put in a yard, which was not an exaggeration, but about 10 feet we had to fill in with soil. And the yard was approximately, I think it was about a half acre. And we filled a half acre of topsoil into their backyard over a period of probably a year and a half. When I was young, probably 12, 13 years old, my brother a little bit older, a bunch of cousins about my age, and brother. We did it by wheelbarrow. We took dump truck loads and wheelbarrow at a time into the backyard. I never thought it was a problem, never thought it was anything unusual. And we find out later kind of did it because they wanted our families to be together. They wanted us to not have opportunities to do things that were going to be unusual. Basically drugs or alcohol is what it comes down to. But we actually grew up doing that for days and days at a time. Our summers were spent there doing it. We spent times on the weekends, but we'd go and we'd have meals, we'd have a big cookout, and there'd be a bunch of us doing things, tamping it down, planting flowers, stuff as we got a little bit further along, all of that, but we never thought it was a bad thing. So growing up, we did that, like I said, for a long time. It was really fun. And so the opportunity to work hard, but do it in a fun way was very important. After that, we'd go do landscaping with my uncle and family members, and we'd go out to eat. So we'd go work really hard for 8 to 10 hours out in the sun, wherever it was, snow, wherever we're doing, and go afterwards and have a great big meal. I think we'd get like $20. And at the time, it was a lot of money. A long time ago, $20 was pretty good. So we get $20 and walk away, and we'd hear my uncle talk to people. My uncle actually had a really good job, was an executive for Eastman Kodak. And we'd have people saying to him, well, I can get you a better job, so you don't have to do this landscaping anymore as you get older. And my uncle would never correct him and say, thank you, I appreciate everything you're doing, I appreciate being able to do this. But my uncle did it because he loved what he did. He loved doing landscaping for others and making things look beautiful. So he did it. So us listening to him, we'd say, okay, how come you never told them that you're actually their boss, like over and by a few different areas? And he would just say, well, that's not the point. I'm here to landscape. That's what I'm doing here. I'm a landscaper. I'm not an executive at Kodak at this point. And so we taught us a lot of good things, a lot of good values that we grew up thinking it was important to be a hard worker and not tell people necessarily what you were doing, and how you may be, more successful than someone else. That wasn't the point. The point was to do things that were going to be helpful to others, and have fun doing it. So I wonder if anybody else has any family ideas that you guys would like to add to this risk and protective factors, things that you else could do.
Well, of course, I'll just point out that this is really what the Discovery Family Adventures are, really to make this easy for parents, because we know that parenting is, I mean, it's a big job, and we get so busy, being parents, that sometimes, even though we know this, sometimes we forget. And that's what the tip section is all about, is reminding us that, okay, yes, I need to be a positive role model on this. I need to put my cell phone down and really be present. And it's just that little extra reminder nudge to do what we know that parents already know so much of this, and they've learned it and they intend to incorporate it, but we want to just kind of help them remember. And then of course, teach if they don't have or they haven't, come across that. So for example, this list of risk and protective factors, these are all things that show up in the tips, and different tips. Sometimes they're related specifically to the adventure, and sometimes they're just kind of that general tip. But this goes right along with what it is that we are trying to help families do.
Yeah, that's very good. You guys do a great job. I think that's really kind of a cool thing. That's why I really love working with you as part of what we do here, because we're all trying to do the same things. We want those families to have some help. Like you said, even though you may remember this, it really happens. Sometimes we just don't sit and think about it often. So having the opportunity to look online and get it and do some examples of things, and also some experiences that you guys provide, has been a great blessing, I think, for this area. So again, think of some other ideas from yourselves. If you do, I do have obviously some of the websites here that I get pulled from to do that. And that's available too if you want to see some of those. But there really is good information available online. For me, we go back to kind of the hierarchy of needs. What are we doing this about? Why are we doing this? Hierarchy of needs. All these areas that we just talked about are right here, all the way through the little triangle here we have. This is really important to think about what we've done as a family and as a group. So think of those in this context, I think, is important. And then the communication, of course, the sandwich stuff, we talked about this before, but these are always good things to think about. We talk about drugs and alcohol, disproving of underage drinking, of drug misuse. What I get asked a lot about now is medicinal marijuana, so cannabis. I get asked a lot about that. Well, that's something we should be encouraging for our families or our children. That's really something that people have to decide on their own. In most cases, we have people that work in prevention, and for drugs and alcohol, they're saying there's a prescription medication used as a prescription medication, that is an appropriate use of that medicine, but doing it in a way that's appropriate for your family or your beliefs, whatever, is something you have to decide on your own. We are finding it's being successful in some areas it's not. So it's up to many people to look at what they want and to decide on their own. Showing you're paying attention again, build child skills and strategies for avoiding underage drug use and drinking. So most of these things that we've done in the past, we talked this a little bit earlier. I'm hoping that you guys have some good information. We talked about reviewing SMART goals, talked about adding communication skills last time. So I want you to keep looking at some of that if you like, and how we hope you feel after our presentation. So any comments before we go? I've got 4 minutes left. That's pretty good for me.
Anybody have any questions for Tim? Yeah, I always love that last slide.
And one of the things is I have to kind of apologize again. There's so much information. I went through it so quickly. I'm hoping you go back and look at this again if you want to have more information on this. If you do want a PowerPoint, let me know. I'll send you the PowerPoint too, so you can have some of these. But in general, like I said, the lists are pretty consistent with risk and protective factors. We know the families involved do much better than families who are not involved. So if you have, opportunities to do some of these things, let us know. Next time we meet for the final one next week, let us know what you've tried. We'll see what worked on your families, or if you have questions, again, let us know what we can do to help.
Thanks, Tim. Anybody have a comment or question?
I feel like I've just spoken to you guys so much, so quickly. It's like this all the time, but I thank you for listening.
That's
Yes,
why
and
we
thank you
record
all
it.
for being here and for coming.
Okay. All right. Well, we look forward to next Monday at noon when we have the final session of our parenting series, and Tim will be with us again. And again, thank you, Tim, and catch the replay. I will post it this afternoon, and we'll see you next week.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Have a great week, everybody.